Come back. The digital divide poses a significant obstacle to achieving educational equity and societal progress. This gap involves more than just the presence of technology, but also the ability to connect. However, education expert Thobo Khathola has undertaken a transformative mission to close this divide and equip rural communities. He joins us now in studio to have a discussion on this. Thobo, thank you so much for joining us here this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Katlego. I appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. You're an education expert, and we know how our rural communities are often shortchanged when it comes to proper educational structures within their regions. How do you believe we could address that divide, especially in the rural areas?
Thank you so much for having me. So, this is exactly where the disparity starts, from students who, the haves and the have-nots, It starts from that basic education where some students have the resources, have the internet, have the gadgets, and some students in the rural communities don't have. So that is where we start seeing the disparity starting, and over time they are not even able to get into university or into higher institutions of learning. So that is basically a problem that we try to solve by not just, servicing students which are in the urban areas, the haves, but we also try to engage with the community, engage with companies and government to also help students that don't have.
So speaking about the work that you're doing as line tutoring, you started off almost 10 years ago in Botswana. You're now fully functional in South Africa, and yours truly is just to provide sort of like the Uber of tutoring. I go on your app, I select the subject, my region, and then I have someone who's able to assist. How important has that become, especially in the urban areas, but more especially in the rural areas where access is quite often a problem?
Yeah, so what we do is we have an Uber for tutors, or an app which is like Uber for tutors on the Google Play Store. So you tell it, it will pick your location, you'll tell it the subjects that you want and the curriculum. So some students are doing IEB, some students are doing CAPS, some are doing IGCSE and A-levels. So you'd obviously type in the curriculum that your child is doing, then it will suggest you tutors in your location, then you can pay, and we have a tutor delivered to you. But the students now in the communities where even internet access itself is a challenge, they really are disadvantaged and can't really access our services. But like you say, to your point, we've been in business for 10 years, and we've really had some community outreach programs where companies like your FNB Foundation, like the government of Botswana, the government of South Africa also, would deploy us to a certain school where they would say, we have these grade 12s they're about to write end of the year. Come with your tutoring program and let's see how we can really increase the marks. And it has really worked. We've improved pass grades by 10 to 15% in 3 months, for most of the students or most of the schools we worked with. And these are a lot of students, by the way. Would be the last project I remember we worked with 150 students. And then the last one, 132 students. So at a time, it's so exciting to, get into that environment. And even the kids themselves, they really have new faces coming through to the school. They're not just accustomed to their usual teachers, but, once they see that tutor who's young, like you see myself and the other team, we have a team of 300 young people that are doing this. The students also just get refreshed and, really look forward to our tutorials.
Quite often in the rural areas, good quality teachers are lost to an exodus of teachers wanting to find work in urban areas. How would you say governments could sort of find programs and initiatives to retain those teachers within those spaces?
Yeah, so the thing is, most of the students that finish at university end up still going back to their rural communities because they can't get jobs in urban South Africa. So they end up going back to their settlements or whatever the case may be. And those are the students that if they could maybe do an extra year of postgraduate certificate in education, register with the South African Council of Educators, they can be able to augment, that engineering degree that you have, that legal school that you went to school for, that accounting degree that you have, maybe just an extra year of postgraduate certificate in education can better place them into the schools back in their rural communities. So I think there's still an opportunity there, even for the students who can't find jobs. You know, the unemployment rate is quite high and it's getting worse. But it's just I think it's just the result of not being able to organize, to coordinate, you know, get those graduates an extra year in university, get them their qualifications, and then they can go back into their rural schools. And it's actually even better because they're, in a way, giving back to the school. Most of them will even be teaching in schools that they've learned in, you know, so there's that patriotism to some extent.
Speaking of just those resources and expanding on those years, expanding on TVET colleges, especially in the rural areas, is quite an important one for students that don't necessarily have to move to urban areas to acquire those skills. In the absence of that, what advice would you have for students looking to acquire those skills that they would ordinarily get from TVET colleges?
Yeah, like we heard in the SONA, you know, there was a Tintswalo going to a TVET college. But the advice that I would give to the government and to the TVET colleges themselves is to say, what skills are we imparting on your Tintswalo? I think Tintswalo is just a figurative speech to say the average South African youth who's unemployed, you know, going to that TVET college, what skill are they going to learn? And we need to also empower them with business skills, you know, so that if you've learned that soft skill or the hard skill that you've learned, how can you be able to put it into the real world? How can you make it work for you to put food on the table? I'll give an example. There was a colleague of mine that went to school together. Unfortunately, they didn't go to university. But he just had this way of mixing chemicals and learning how to get this sanitary chemical. So he was able to buy 2 or 3 mobile toilets, and he was able to, you know, use the chemical to obviously for sanitization and everything. And right now he's sitting with a fleet of executive toilets that, you know, if there are high events, you know, if there are weddings, funerals, you know, if there are, you know, big events, he'd be able to bring those toilets. And he's making quite a lot, you know, for somebody who hasn't even stepped into university, you know. So some of the things we shouldn't really, you know, look with an undermining eye, but it's something that students can use to, you know, empower themselves and be able to make food for themselves and their families.
Of course. Some of the basis of your business obviously relies a lot on internet and internet access, and like you mentioned earlier on, that many of the children sitting in rural areas wanting those tutors to come and assist them, the barrier could be the fact that they don't have access to adequate internet access. In terms of facilitating online sessions, do you provide that, and how then do you reach out to children who don't necessarily have access to internet?
Yeah, that's something that we've worked with in Botswana. Is we do really need internet in schools, and I've seen that there's a great initiative by the government, the SA Youth Mobi, which allows, you know, students and communities to apply for jobs. But you know, some of those don't have the bandwidth to get into other platforms. You know, it's really important for students to be able to engage in the village, you know, the internet village, Internet of Things. And in Botswana, an example of what we have is what is called smart bots. So they've installed internet connection in all the schools, and they actually have young people like myself to monitor the use, because sometimes you'll install internet in the school and the students use it for other things. You know, it's like having a gun. You can use a gun for the right things and for the wrong reasons. So that is why you'd have a Thobo, that's why you'd have a Lion Tutoring come to the school and say, guys, there's internet connection, but let's use it for the right reasons. Let's use it to research, to get past papers, to get syllabus updates, as we see that the syllabus keeps updating. And sometimes it even helps us to be able to reach to the students in other remote areas, like we've had last year. There's a community in the Kalahari Desert that we actually tutored online. So we'd have a Skype connection with the kids. They'll come in, and the HOD would log them into the Skype, and then they would sit there and ask questions with somebody sitting in Gaborone, for instance. So those are some of the things that the internet can be able to help, but it has to be closely monitored.
And with the work that you're doing, how many females do you have in driving that economic participation that they would have in tutoring and also just expanding on some of the services that you have?
Yeah, so from the 330 young people that we employ both here in South Africa and Botswana, 70% are women and 95% are young people under the age of 35. So, you know, we really advocate for women empowerment. Again, because it's a demand and supply. With our service, people, it's a phenomena that we can't explain, you know, but, you know, educators are usually female, I think because of just maternal instinct sometimes, the way that they are patient with the kids, patient with the students. So apart from us putting women up front, you know, it's a service that needs women. It's a service that needs young people, especially black young females.
Thobo, thank you so much for joining us. Truly an inspirational piece that you have here, one that certainly helps children and also people that are doing up to their masters that could get onto the app and get some assistance. We wish you all the best, and we really do wish that there's more access for children in those rural areas who need such services.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Katlego. And if they want to hear all about us on social media, it's at Lion Tutoring, all social media platforms.
All right. Thank you so much for that. That was education expert and Lion Tutoring Managing Director Thobo Khathola speaking to us there about some of their initiatives that they've launched within the rural areas in the education space. Well, let's take